Welcome. Have you had a good day and a half? Yeah? There are some fantastic resources out there. I saw some a bit like that last week in London, and some of them are yummy. I'm sure you've had a really good opportunity to network, talk to each other, share good practice, think about what you're doing and reflect on where you are in your own settings and drawing from other people's experiences as well. I come to this role in Ofsted at the moment, which is a seconded role, with several hats on. I have a long background in education and early years, so I come as a practitioner. I come as an inspector. I became an HMI in 2000, so I've had a few years doing this job. I'm being very privileged in going up and down the country. I come as a mum. I've got 2 grown-up children, and I come now as a grandmother as well. And every time I go into a setting, whether it's a childminder's setting, a preschool, a day nursery, a school, nursery school, infant school, primary school, secondary school, I look at it and think about it in terms of what I knew as a practitioner, what I see as I go up and down the country as an inspector, what I wanted for my children, and what I want now for my granddaughter. And all those sorts of issues come together when I come out and talk at conferences like this, and when I talk in smaller groups as well, with very experienced colleagues like Nima, who represent large bodies of people, listening to what they have to say, and listening to ways in which Ofsted, as an inspectorate, can provide the right degrees of challenge, because that's what we're there for, because at the end of the day, we're all doing what we do for the same reason, it's for the sake of the children, but also in terms of support. And that, I want to talk a bit about that this afternoon. Now, I've got about 20 minutes to talk, and I also want to take some questions, because I know there are lots of questions that people want to ask. I'm going to not talk about every slide, because I've got much more than 20 minutes worth of slides. And I do that because I want to make sure you've got time for questions. But what I will do is make the slides available after the event. I'm doing a number of conferences at the moment with some colleagues, and so we'll put them up on our website, and we'll make sure that you have a link so that you can see the text and the commentary. So a few things I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about why Ofsted's proposing changes, something about inspection, something about the frequency of inspection. For many of you who are here because you are nursery managers, practitioners, owners, maybe parents as well, grandparents even. A little bit about childminders and agencies, but not much, because we're not far down the road with our developments there, because we're still waiting for the legislation to pass through Parliament. Something about inadequate providers, not much about children's centres today. Registration and enforcement activity, that's a really important bit I want to talk to you about. And something about how HMI, like me, are becoming involved in work beyond routine inspection. So, first of all, something about what we know about early years provision, and then importantly, why we're using what we know to make changes. This is a no-brainer, really, isn't it? Every one of you, I'm sure, will share the same view as me. Nobody doubts the importance of high-quality early years provision. It's absolutely fundamental to children's learning and development. And we have an issue in this country, which is that many children who are less than privileged, those who are most vulnerable, who come from socially deprived, economically deprived areas, face the biggest challenges. And they tend to be the children who are only able to access provision that isn't always as good as it needs to be. And that's part of what I want to talk about today. Sir Michael, the Chief Inspector, published a report yesterday called the Access and Achievement Report, and it was about children who are the most vulnerable children, youngsters, young people in this country. And he has said something about early years provision in his report. What we know is that effective providers set very high expectations. Children are introduced to structures and routines and behaviours that help their learning. And that helps them to build self-assurance and confidence, as well as awareness of each other's needs. That's the report, that's what it looks like. It's published now. Do have a look at it, it's on our website. It's a really, really good read, and it'll make you think. Some of it's about early years, some of it's about schools, some of it's about what happens to young people when they leave school. What else do we know? Well, we know, don't we, that preschool education that's well designed has a really strong impact on children's learning and development over time. And here's some research. Every child benefits from good quality early years care and education, not just those that are the most vulnerable. Kathy Silver, who's appeared recently in front of the Select Committee, she's done lots of research and will continue to do so. And she shows the really important impact that good quality preschool early education and care has on children. What else do we know? We know about language skills. We absolutely know that unless children are able to develop their communication skills and their language skills from an early age, it does hamper their learning. Not just when they're at school, but when they're 3, 4, 5. And this is a really stark bit of research. The first bullet, you may not be able to read it at the back. It was research done in 2000. On average, a toddler from a family that's on welfare will hear around 600 words an hour, and for every 3 phrases they hear, 2 of them will be negative. Stop that, get out of there. For a child from a professional family, they'll hear about 2,000 words an hour, and for every 6 phrases, only 1 will be negative. There's a very, very stark difference in terms of the quality of parenting and the difference that parents are able to make for their children. And where they're not able to do that because they don't have sufficiently well developed skills themselves, boy, that flags the importance of really good early years provision and care. Poor language really is a strong predictor of poor literacy skills. Here's another really stark bit of evidence. At the age of 6, there's just a gap of a few months for a child with a reading age, but by 14, there's a gap of 5 years. So for a child who has limited language, parenting that's not been as well developed for them as it is for some other children, there's likely to be a gap of about 5 years in their reading age. Think of the difference that makes to them in accessing the curriculum. So the work you do, the work I did, the work I look at when I go up and down the country into different settings, shows me the difference that really good preschool care and education can make. So if we know all those things, what do we know about how well children do? How well they get on in their learning and development? Well, we know that a substantial minority of children, it is a lot of children, arrive at statutory school without the skills and the knowledge they need. And the second bullet is an example that I could quote you from 2 of my schools where I was a head teacher, where I had a nursery and I had a nursery for children aged 2 and upwards. And I had some children who did not come to my nursery, who arrived in reception as rising 5-year-olds, being pushed in a buggy with a dummy in their mouths, and some of them were still in nappies. Now, what a difference to the child who is independent, who is able to put on their own coat, who is able to go to the toilet on their own, who is able to drink from a cup, eat and make choices about what they eat. What a difference. There is such a stark difference in where children are when they arrive at school, and the quality of what is provided before they start school is what helps to narrow that gap, to narrow that distance. And we know, we've said something about the importance of early education, but we know what's happening to children in terms of how well they are meeting expected outcomes by the time they get to the end of reception. And we know that too many of them aren't meeting expectations. This is what we know about communication, language and literacy. Last year, more than a third of all children were not working securely in communication, language and literacy. This meant, of course, they started in year 1, when they were rising 6-year-olds, without the early reading and writing skills they needed. About a quarter weren't working securely in solving problems, reasoning, basic numeracy, and of course that put them immediately at a disadvantage. And about a fifth hadn't reached a secure level of development in personal, social and emotional development. I'm old enough to remember the introduction of the desirable learning outcomes, which was the forerunner of the foundation stage, which was the forerunner of the early years foundation stage. And there was a huge hurrah from me and my colleagues and people I work with when we had something about children's personal, social and emotional development added to what had to be provided, because it absolutely flags the importance of that. And look at how many children were not reaching expectations last year. We don't have the results of this year's early years profile. We will do soon. So what does that mean then? The research about the importance of good early years provision, the data show that the biggest difference that is made to a child in the early years is determined by the quality of interaction between adults and children. I think a nursery or a preschool is as good as that interaction between adult and child. I would say the same about school. That's where the absolute difference lies, in the quality of what's being provided. So, we know that high quality provision is important, so how good is the quality of early years education and care in this country? Let's have a look at some of the data. Now, it's maybe hard to see this from the back. Childminders are the bar at the top, childcare on non-domestic premises, that's preschools, nurseries and so on, in the middle, all provision at the end. So you can see, we call this the state of the nation. This is going back to 2008, the most recent inspection judgment that every setting on the early years register has. Along the bottom you see the bar. Good proportion judged outstanding at their last inspection, good proportion judged good, but look at this. All those children receive provision that's only satisfactory. That's something we've got to make a change about. And here are the statistics that go with that. There's the data. This is what it means. Almost 250,000 children being cared for in settings that aren't yet good. If you think about those disadvantaged children, if you think about the importance of at least good quality provision, that's 250,000 children who weren't getting that. Those data are really stark. Here are some more recent inspection judgments since last September, when we all had a greater focus on children's learning and development. So more settings are getting actions about children's learning and development. And we still see a really good chunk of providers that are giving really good or better provision. But this hasn't changed much. And in fact, there's a bit more that's inadequate. There's still too many children only receiving provision that's satisfactory. So what do we do about all that? We know about the importance of high quality provision. We know about what happens to children when they get to the end of the foundation stage. We know about inspection judgments. What do we do about that? Well, what we know is there's some great provision. Some of you, every day, will be delivering really high quality provision. The problem is it's not consistent across the country. And so Michael, the Chief Inspector's report, the Access and Achievement report yesterday, said that's exactly the same thing in schools, it's exactly the same thing in further education. So what we're doing is we're changing the way we inspect. I hope you've all had a chance to hear about the consultation we ran until the end of May, which was looking at changing the satisfactory judgment and saying if provision is satisfactory, it's not really good enough. Good is the benchmark. And we've said that about schools, we've said it about colleges, we've said it about independent schools, initial teacher education, and now we're going to say it most likely about early years providers. And we also have been consulting on what that means in terms of inspection frequency. We've had some really interesting responses to our consultation, and many people have said you're right to introduce a requires improvement judgment. But if you do that, you shouldn't leave settings for too long. You should go back and inspect them more frequently. So we've consulted on going back to preschools and nurseries more quickly, within 24 months rather than 2 years. And we will, pending the due process of legislation, be able to offer paid-for inspections. Now, there are some issues about that, we think, some equalities issues. Large nursery chains can afford to say, well, we think our nursery isn't requiring improvement anymore, we think it's good now, we'd like you to come along and pay and do a paid-for inspection, Ofsted. A small nursery might be in exactly the same position and not be able to afford for that. So we're having to think about that. But the legislation will allow us to do that. And we already have nurseries who say, we were inspected, we were judged to be satisfactory, we think we're good now, we want you, Ofsted, to come along and look at us again because we really don't think we're just satisfactory anymore. And we had a lot of that coming through in the consultation. Childminders, a little bit about childminders, which is we're not making up our minds about what we should do yet because there's legislation going through the Houses of Parliament about childminder agencies. Once that's gone through, we'll consult, and we'll consult about the frequency of inspection for childminders. We are taking a tougher stance with inadequate providers, because when we had a look at some of the complaints and the concerns that we were receiving from parents, and I know some of you want to ask me questions about that, they related to really fundamental things like ratios and supervision and children's learning. And we didn't think it was right that we didn't go and have a look at settings that had had 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 complaints or concerns raised about the same thing. And when you think about those data that say how many children were not reaching the expected outcomes, there is a link there between the quality of provision. So we are being tougher, and we're being tougher on settings judged to be inadequate. We do monitor. We monitor all settings that are judged to be inadequate, and we go along and we re-inspect them within 12 months. I don't know whether you would be amazed or not, but you'd be interested to know we had a huge number of comments through our online consultation about how long we should leave inadequate providers, because we asked that question. And there was a very, very strong feeling that actually inadequate providers shouldn't be left for too long, because for every day in a child's life, that's an important day. We're also having a look at what we do internally. We're tightening up what we do. And you may have heard that we're looking at ways of linking the histories of settings. So when one setting closes and another one opens and it's got the same owner and the same manager, parents have told us it's really important they know that. So what we're trying to do is find some legislation that will allow us to do that, because we've had a very, very strong message from parents. They want to know as much as possible about settings when they're making choices about childcare and early education for their children. So that's the broad spectrum of what we're doing. And here's something about how we are going to step beyond our routine inspections. We know that how we inspect and what we look at is really important, but we think there's more that we can do. So what we're starting to do is get HMI, people like me, people like my colleague who's here today, going out and working with settings that have been judged to be satisfactory or requires improvement in the future. We're starting to do some good practice conferences. We've got our first one in London in a couple of weeks' time. And we're starting to organise seminars. We've got 3 next month, again in London, in 3 different London boroughs, working with providers who aren't yet good. And we'll learn something from them because they'll tell us about what they think is important in helping them to improve their practice. And we'll also talk to them about where we think they can be sharper in what they're doing. And we're planning to roll that out across the country. We've been talking to the Minister about this, talking to the department, so there'll be more HMI, we're recruiting more, to come out and do that sort of work. We also think that there probably isn't enough out in the public domain about really good practice. We don't think it's shared well enough. So in the last few months, I commissioned a survey where we went to lots of different settings, to childminders, to day nurseries, preschools and schools, nursery schools and infant schools, to look at really good practice. And we found, of course, it isn't rocket science, that at the heart of a good provider is a good leader and manager. And there are some strong, really good messages that we're going to be publishing in our report. We're going to publish it at the same time as our first conference next month. And these are the sorts of messages. Strong leaders make good provision. They're really clear about what it is they want in their setting, and of course they put the children's needs first. They are absolutely determined to get things right first time and to give children the very best start in life, particularly those that are the most vulnerable. They have very high expectations of their children, but also of adults. The leaders themselves are highly qualified. They're experienced. They know about the EYFS. They know what good teaching looks like. And I use the word teaching deliberately. I teach my granddaughter. I was teaching her at the weekend how to hold a paintbrush and make marks on our patio outside with water. I taught her how to pull the skin off a banana and eat it. Good settings have good teachers. They show children what to do, they coach them, they mentor them, and that's what the best leaders do. They know what they need to do to bring about improvement, and they expect and they encourage all their staff to be involved in what they're doing, and they're not afraid to challenge when they see poor performance. I went to a preschool recently with 4, who happened to be ladies, just under 20 children, 16 children I think. And it was very, very interesting because they were very caring people. They had a lovely range of resources. But what they didn't have was a really good knowledge of how to intervene at the right moment to really stretch children and challenge their learning. And one adult, one of the 4, so that was a quarter of the adults in the setting, was particularly weak. What she did was she just watched the children. She didn't intervene at all, and there were so many missed opportunities when she could have used maths language, where she could have made children have a look at what was really happening and really challenged them to think. And I talked to the nursery manager afterwards, and the nursery manager was really, really disappointed because they thought they were an outstanding setting, and they weren't, because so many children were not getting the most out of every day's experiences. And one of the biggest problems in the setting was she was not challenging the one adult, a quarter of the staffing, who was not really engaging with the children at all. She was too frightened to do that because they worked as a team and she didn't want to upset her. But if she'd put the children first, she would have done, and challenged her in the right way to help her to improve what she was doing. This is an interesting slide because it shows that the higher the level of qualification, the better the quality of provision. At the top, you see the highest level of qualification. At the bottom, you see the least. And there is a direct correlation between the two and the quality of what's provided. And, interestingly, Ofsted inspection judgments. We're going to use that survey to help us with our improvement work, and we're going to do another one in the autumn. We're going to go around to lots of settings in the country. One of yours might be one of them. And we're going to look at teaching, where there's really good practice, how adults in a setting really encourage children's learning and development and take them on, move them on. When I was a mum, long before I was a granny, what I wanted from my children's nursery experience and from their school was that they got on, that they were happy, that they were safe and well cared for, and that they were really challenged, so that they were helped to reach their potential. That's what we'll be looking for when we do a survey in the autumn. A last word about how we're organising ourselves. I told you that HMI are going to be working with providers that aren't yet good, and we've reorganised ourselves. We're now in 8 regions, and what will happen is HMI in each of the 8 regions will start to get to know about the quality of providers in their area, whether it's early years, schools, colleges, independent schools, social care. Their job is to get to know what's going on, and their job is to find out where the very best practice is so they can share it. So if you're a practitioner or an owner of an outstanding nursery, and we've just inspected a nursery that requires improvement, we might come knocking on your door and say, can the staff from down the road come and have a look at what you're doing, because you're brilliant at developing the children's language, or you're really good at taking them on in helping them to solve problems, or you're really good at stretching their personal development, or you're really good at helping staff in their professional development. We're likely to come knocking on your door, but it will depend on where you're located as to which HMI do that. And then lastly, I love this slide. These children found some fantastic things inside that tire. There is some really, really great provision out there. And the weakest providers should learn from the best. Many of them are in this audience today. Because if we use the early years to make sure that we're using the best providers and their skilled practitioners to improve the quality up and down the country, especially where disadvantage is deep and widespread, we will make a difference. And we will change that statistic of too many children not meeting expectations at the end of the early years foundation stage. Thank you.